Hi, everybody. Welcome to the second edition of the conference, Philosophy and Generative Grammar. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rafael Gutierrez. I am a PhD student in linguistics at Pompeu Fabra University. And here with me is David Ray, the other co-organizer of the conference, who is professor of philosophy at Universidad del Valle. The first edition of this conference took place almost exactly 2 years ago. Some of the speakers who participated in that edition are here with us today, and some speakers are joining us for the first time. We are pleased to have you all here, and we welcome you and the audience. We hope the conference brings the opportunity for a fruitful exchange of ideas between linguists and philosophers. In case you don't have the program, you can find it in the link that David is posting on the chat. And in case you missed the first edition of the conference, you can watch the recordings of the talks in the YouTube playlist that David will also post in the chat. That being said, it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Professor Martina Wiltschko from Pompeu Fabra University. The talk that she is giving today is titled, What Grammar Tells Us About Knowledge. Martina, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I'm just going to try and share my screen. There. You can see my screen?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I love big questions, and I love trying to answer big questions with little linguistic facts, and that's what I'm going to try and do today. So there's actually three notions of knowledge that I have in mind. One, it is going to be the main part of the talk, which is what is knowledge. I'm also going to try and address what is linguistic knowledge, and something kind of related, which is something about this old question whether language is for thought, which you can think of as the creation of knowledge, or is language for communication. So just a little bit of background on these three questions. There's a lot of philosophical writing about the nature of knowledge, and essentially there's two main proposals. One is that knowledge is more complex than belief. So knowledge is assumed to be belief plus something else like truth, justification for belief, etc. But there's also an opposing view according to which knowledge is the most basic mental state and that it cannot be defined. So these are opposing views, and I think we'll have something to say about that. As for the question regarding what is linguistic knowledge, as somebody who works within the generative enterprise, I am interested in linguistics as a cognitive enterprise. And in generative grammar, the language faculty is considered to be an autonomous, let's just call it module, even though there's a lot of problems with the term, but is autonomous, somewhere embedded in cognition, but it's autonomous, interfacing with other components. Another cognitively oriented view of linguistics has it that language is just part of cognition and that there is no autonomy. So that led to the linguistic wars. And I think I have a little bit of an argument for the autonomy of grammar today. But that's just an afterthought today. And then the last question that we can ask is language for thought? So there's something about knowledge in our minds, or is it primarily for communication? Again, we have two opposing views. Chomsky's view has always been language is a system that is fundamentally for thought. But the opposing view, which is also associated with the cognitive linguistics and has been advocated by Jack and Duff as well, according to which language arose primarily in the interest of enhancing communication. And again, I will have something to say about that. Okay, but the main talk is this. This is the overview. So I'm going to introduce a linguistic fact that I don't think has been acknowledged in the literature. And it is that unmarked declarative sentences are universally used to express knowledge. And I use I think it's a linguistic universal. And in as much as linguistic universals tell us something about our cognition, I will draw some conclusions from this linguistic fact, asking what is knowledge. In the first step, I'm gonna adopt the view that knowledge has something to do with commitment to truth. Then I'm going to ask questions about the nature of truth, and I'm going to conclude that both truth and knowledge are grammatical constructs. And then I will introduce my view of what this grammatical construct might be, which has to do with the way I view grammar these days, and I will introduce that in a bit. And then I'm gonna draw some conclusions from all of that for the questions we just have asked. And if there's time, I'll also talk about what implications it might have for the way we interact with artificial intelligence. Can I just ask, because I don't see anybody, am I still like,
Yes, perfect.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so here's a puzzle about knowledge. When you're certain about something, like you're in the rain, you say it's raining. And you can describe the situation by saying, Alaka knows it's raining. But in the same context, Alaka could not say, I know it's raining. He's certain, so obviously he knows that it's raining, but it'd be very weird for him to say, I know it's raining. You can make this sentence felicitous in certain contexts. So for example, when there is disagreement, so suppose he gets a text from his friend and she says, I think it's sunny, and he goes, I know it's raining. So there's a disagreement, there's a contrast between her belief state and his, like he knows he's sitting in the rain. Similarly, if he changes his mind, so suppose he was in his house and then he can think it's sunny, and he can say, I think it's sunny, and then he goes outside and then he can say, well, now I know it's raining. So there's a contrast between what he thought before and what he now knows. And in that context, you can say, I know it's raining. But if there is no disagreement, if there's no change of mind, him just standing in the rain and saying, I know it's raining is weird. And so the generalization is, and I think it's a universal, I haven't seen counter evidence to it, we use bare declarative clauses to encode that we know P. Okay, so just to get some temporary definitions out of the way, we'll have to distinguish between subjective knowledge. So knowing subjective is what you could think of the feeling of being certain, and intuition can be based on direct evidence or something that's generally accepted. So you can say Alaka thinks he knows it's raining, but he's wrong. That shows you that somebody subjectively can think they know something, but the world around him knows that it's wrong. So that reflects the fact that as human beings, we are not we can't know everything. So when we have the feeling of knowing, there's no way that we don't know whether it is actually true in the world. That would be objective knowledge. That would be like when everybody agrees, and who knows whether that is ever possible, but that would be the one that that can be defined as this is justified true belief. Okay, so just that out of the way, going back to our generalization, and I'm gonna go through a series of linguistic phenomena that serve to mark uncertainty. So when we depart from being certain, we also depart from just using a bare declarative clause. And you can do that, language has a slew of options to do that, like propositional attitude verbs. Like when you're not certain, you're in your house, in the bed, you can say, I believe it's raining, if you're not certain. If you're outside in the rain, it's weird to say, I believe it's raining. That's like making a joke. So when you're uncertain, you don't say a bare declarative clause, but you can add a propositional attitude verb to that bare declarative clause. Certainty works the other way around. Next, modals. He's in the house and he hears rainy noise, and then he can go, it must be raining. Again, when he's outside, it's weird for him to say it must be raining. That's, again, kind of like a joke. So again, departure from knowledge can be marked with any kind of modal. And when you're certain, you don't mark it with a modal. And crucially, there is no modal that expresses certainty. And here's a note on must, because must is analyzed as a modal of necessity, but still it creates weaker statements than non-modal sentences. So that's been long observed. So Kartunen says one would use the epistemic must only in circumstances where it's not yet an established fact that P. Someone who has actually seen P would not ordinarily use must, since they are in the position to make the stronger claim without the modal. So even the modal of necessity is weaker than the bare declarative clause. Next, evidentials. So Alaka is in the house. Maybe he's looking on his phone with the weather app open, and he goes, apparently it's raining. So he has some indirect evidence. When he's outside, he can't use apparently, because that would indicate that he has indirect evidence, but in this case, he has direct evidence. So again, apparently it's raining sounds like a joke, but again, you can make it good when you have this change of, you suddenly realize it's raining. So inside the house, he says, I think it's sunny. And then he steps outside and he goes like, well, apparently it's raining. Okay. And then a striking fact about evidentials, and here is where it is like, where I find the little linguistic facts, they tell us so much about our mind. This is a generalization about evidentiality, like in languages that encode evidentiality as grammatical markers. We have a generalization that, I mean, for those of you who don't know about evidentiality, languages can mark their propositions with evidentials that encode direct evidence or indirect evidence. And for indirect evidentials, it could be a reportative, so hearsay, or an inferential. So you have some kind of evidence which is not direct, and you can infer from that. And that's marked in those languages. Now, what is striking is that the markers for direct evidence, which of course is subjective knowing, is the one that cross-linguistically is the one that tends to be zero, so unmarked in a way, right? So this is, you can look at these quotes here from Delancey. The unmarked form in an evidential system typically represents information which the speaker knows from first-hand visual perception, propositions conveying information obtained by other means, or perception, hearsay, inference, are marked for source of evidence. And another quote, the ordinary unmarked forms are said to indicate that the speaker's knowledge is acquired by personal perception. So go back to the kinds of evidentials that we find in the languages of the world. If everything else being equal, you could expect that any of these markers could be realized as a silent, as a zero morpheme, but that's not the case. If an evidential marker is silent, it is the direct evidential. And that, I don't think, is a coincidence. It tells us again that it's part of this larger generalization that direct evidence leads to knowledge, and direct evidentials are the unmarked case. Okay, I'm gonna skip narrativity, and so this is our summary. Bare declarative clauses encode that we know the proposition, and uncertainty must be linguistically marked. Now, of course, we can pretend right? So if you think about what Trump says, oftentimes it is not the truth, yet nevertheless he uses bare declarative clauses. So language doesn't force us to be truthful. We can still come up with things that we pretend, or maybe he's pretending, maybe he's delusional, we don't know. But he uses this language which sounds like he knows, but we need not believe him. So that's a caveat which I'm gonna not, talk about any further. So if you don't lie, and if you don't pretend, and if you're not delusional, it is the case that language is built in a way that the bare declarative clauses encode knowledge, subjective knowledge, of course. And now the question is, why would that be? One suggestion that has been informally made to me is by Martin Haspelmatt, and he says, well, maybe it has to do with frequency, because we talk more often about what we know than about our beliefs, maybe because knowledge is more relevant in some sense. Markedness effects in grammatical encoding are often due to frequency. Yes, that might be, but I mean, it is an empirical question. Is it actually the case that we are more often than not certain, and that we talk about our knowledge more than about our beliefs? Intuitively, I don't think that's the case. A lot of our linguistic interactions have to do with figuring out things together. And so, but it's an empirical question, but I don't think so. So I'm going to dismiss that frequency argument, put it aside, and go on. So now I'm going to the next step, which is about a knowledge requiring a commitment, a personal, subjective commitment to truth. And this is where some of the literature on, say, assertions capture what I have now introduced as a linguistic generalization. So when we say that P, so when we assert a proposition, we are required to be committed to the truth of P via social conventions for assertions. And that's an old, that lots of philosophers have talked about this, the rules for assertions. One must assert that P only if one knows that P, or Grice's maxim of quality. But commitment to the truth of the proposition requires the feeling of knowing. Now we can ask, what is truth? And that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to talk about truth, and I'm going to argue that it is a linguistic construct. So to know the meaning of a sentence is to know its truth conditions. That's like the bread and butter of a semanticist. So that's led to, well, the basis for that is to say that snow is white is true if and only if snow is white. Okay, so and again, in old works, Stenius argued that to produce a sentence in the indicative mode, so what I called here the bare declarative clause, produce it only if its sentence radical proposition is true. So it's part of the same generalization that I made. And we observe that in language, there's another markedness generalization, which is that an unmarked declarative sentence universally is used to encode truth. And that markedness relation, that I talked about in terms of what we can do to mark uncertainty, it is also, I think, relevant that the declarative is the unmarked sentence type. So if we look at other sentence type, like interrogatives and imperatives, you have to do something to the proposition to make it into an interrogative or into an imperative. So in terms of generative grammar, what you're doing is like a kind of transformation, if you want, or current versions of transformations. So the unmarked clause type is the declarative, and you see that in English when you turn a a declarative into an interrogative, you need to do something. You need to add, if there's no auxiliary, you need to add an auxiliary, and you have subject auxiliary inversion. And even in languages where, like Spanish, where you don't have to do subject auxiliary inversion, when you mark interrogativity with just intonation, so like Spanish, tiene un perro is declarative, tiene un perro, rising intonation, that is a question. And oops, no, I don't have a slide to that, but the claim here is that rising intonation is marked as opposed to the falling declarative intonation. And we know that because, I mean, you could say, well, maybe falling intonation is also a form of marking something as a declarative, but that's not so. And we know that from people who study phonetics, they tell us that the falling intonation is a product of simply the fact that we're like losing air, like there's a decrease in pressure, and so you have automatically the falling intonation. Rising intonation requires effort. So because we cannot pronounce a sentence without intonation, it looks like we have falling intonation, but that's just what happens. It's a physical fact, whereas rising intonation is a form of marking. It's a type of morpheme, if you want. And then you could, as for imperatives, I argue, I think that imperatives are also a marked clause type. Maybe you'd say, well, doesn't it look less marked? It has less verb morphology, it lacks a subject. But there is, and I don't have time to go into that, Eichenwald, for example, says that the simplicity of imperatives is an illusion. They're universally associated with a marked grammar of their own. So you can look at her work to support that. So we have this other markedness generalization that the basic clause type, the declarative clause type, is the one that is used to express a truth. The other ones, like as we know, we have to do quite a bit of work to get questions and imperatives into truth conditional semantics. So why would that be? Why would language be built that way? Language could be different. Language could be like a Bayesian language. So you could have a language where to know the meaning of a sentence is to know its probability conditions. And then you paraphrase that as to know how the world might look like for the sentence to be probable, right? So then you would, our regular sentence, Snow is white is true if and only if, you could replace by Snow is white is probable if and only if I think snow is white, right? So there is no logical reason as to why this should not be the case. But as far as I know, no language works like that. There's no language where the unmarked declarative sentence is used to encode a probability. Okay, so to analyze, to understand this phenomenon, I'm gonna assume with Wolfram Hintzen, we wrote a paper about this together called The Grammar of Truth, and our argument there was this. So the classic sentence, snow is white, is true if and only if snow is white, is actually quite puzzling. The argument is, why should something that contains a truth predicate, like snow is white is true, be logically equivalent to something that does not? Snow is white. So why does, if snow is white, why does that, where does the truth come from? Why don't we need to say it is true that snow is white in order to say snow is white? And then the conclusion that we draw in this paper is that the predication of truth is encoded structurally, implicit in the grammar of any asserted sentence. It is irreducible and expresses truth merely through assembling a number of grammatical elements in the right configuration. And that's where we stop in that paper. We just say it's a grammatical fact, and there we stop. And now I want to, go a step further, and I want to propose that if truth is a grammatical construct, and if knowledge depends on truth, then maybe knowledge too is a grammatical construct. But now we have to ask, what is that grammatical configuration? And that's where I'm going to start using a tree. Okay, so I'm going to introduce the minimal possible assumptions about my assumptions about the top of the syntactic tree. So this is part of what I've published in this monograph, The Grammar of Interactional Language, where I argue that the propositional structure, where we encode truth conditions and where we encode our thoughts, is dominated by what I call the interactional structure, which is the domain of use of interaction. And there's two types of layers of structure that I assume, and one of these layers will be relevant for us. So you have what I call the ground speaker phrase and the ground addressee phrase. And so this is a way of introducing speaker and addressee. So it's a way of introducing the syntactization of speech acts, if you know that literature, but it takes insights from conversation analysis, and so it's a particular version of saying that speech acts are syntactically encoded. And so the speaker ground has an abstract argument that says that it is a placeholder for my epistemic state. And then on top of that, you have an addressee ground, which you have a placeholder argument for what I think my addressee knows. Okay. And so my proposal is that the syntax of knowing is this, that the propositional structure is put into the speaker's ground. Okay, so it moves the proposition that I'm asserting is realized in the speaker's ground. And I think that it encodes this feeling of knowing. So when we have it's raining, we put it's raining in the speaker's ground, and therefore it creates this feeling of knowing. It's like that I know it's raining because it's in my epistemic state. But when I say I know it's raining, then that whole proposition, I know it's raining, is put into my ground. So then it's like my knowledge is that I know it's raining. So it's not that I know, it's like in the ground, I'm like, I know that. And if I put I know it's raining into my ground, I know that I know it's raining. Okay. And so I can talk about knowing about knowing in these cases that we've looked at earlier. And okay, for the syntacticians among you, it looks like syntax really matters. So you might say, why do you need syntax for that? Well, there's independent evidence that knowledge, there's a particular syntax of knowledge, and it's that the unmarked clause that is the expressing knowledge, and that is if you know Cinque's cartography. The epistemic category is for him is lower than the evidential and the evaluative and the speech act. So it's the lowest of the epistemic expressive categories. And then similar in a recent paper by Susie Wurmbrand, she shows, and I'll spare you the syntactic details, but she comes to the same conclusion that what she calls the propositional phrase is what she considers to be like knowledge. She doesn't quite say it that way, but if you read her paper, you realize that. And everything else, like you have a judge phrase and a commitment phrase, there's more going on with your knowledge. So, and her evidence for this type of hierarchy, that the proposition phrase, which expresses knowledge, is the lowest one. Her evidence is purely syntactic. It has to do with ECM marking, and that is uncontroversially syntactic. So if you're interested in the details, go read Susie's paper. Okay, so now assuming that we have this interactional structure, which is above the basic propositional structure which creates objects of knowing. Now up here, we can do things with our objects of knowing in interaction. So we can modify it, evaluate, and negotiate it. So for example, the Canadian A is a marker of negotiation, right? If I have, it's raining, and if I say it's raining, then I'm asking you to confirm. Here we are negotiating what we both want to know. We're negotiating common ground. Okay? And there's a lot of these markers that do exactly that. They modify, evaluate, negotiate the propositional content, and that's what interactional structure does. That's what happens with language in interaction. There's some German ones. If you speak German, you have and even if you don't speak German, if you're interested in discourse markers, you have likely heard about ja and doch in German. What they do is they modify the proposition in ways that relate how it relates to my epistemic state or how it relates to your epistemic states. So it departs from normal conditions of assertion in that when I'm surprised or when I say, I think you know that already, I can use one type of marker, and when I want to remind you that you knew that before, I don't have new information for you, then I can use doch in German. So we can mark our propositions with particular types of particles that modify how the proposition relates to the epistemic states. Okay, and you see that I can't use these particles when I want to tell you something new. If I say, you know what, I have a new dog. I can't say, you know what, ich habe doch einen neuen Hund. It's bad. Okay, so Zimmermann says these discourse particles help to organize a discourse by conveying information concerning the epistemic states of the speaker or her interlocutors or both with respect to the transcriptive or propositional content of the utterance. And the same we can do in English with these sentence final particles. Okay. And you see that this goes, like when you add one of those sentence final particles, it goes beyond knowing. Like you have a dog, you can paraphrase by saying, I know that you have a dog. If I say, I believe that you have a dog, then you can paraphrase that again. It's like, I know that I believe that you have a dog. That's all, like, I believe that you have a dog itself is a proposition. So if I say that proposition, I know that proposition. So in this case, I know that I believe that you have a dog. But when I add a, you have a dog, this cannot be paraphrased as, I know that you have a dog, Like the a will always take scope over the entire thing, over the entire complex sentence, but not over the embedded, you have a dog, which was the input that we tried to paraphrase. Okay, so after all that, I think we can dismiss this possibility that language could be like, well, it could logically be like this, that it encodes probability conditions, but in reality, that's not what we find in language. In reality, what we find in language is what all people, assume. All semantics is snow is white is true if and only if snow is white. So it's truth. And according to Hinson and Wiltschko and what I just said, I want to say that it's part of our knowledge of language, that language is set up that way. It's irreducible. Okay. Now, but then you can still ask, but how does it get into grammar? How do truth get into the grammar, but not probability? Why is language set up that way? And now we're becoming a little more speculative, because this is actually the question that is is an old question that we still haven't really solved. Like, how does anything enter grammar? Why does tense become a grammatical category or number and not, I don't know, unhappiness or blueness? Why do we get the categories of grammar that we get and not others. And it's a question that is hotly debated, I think. And one interesting approach is something that to my knowledge, two researchers have proposed. One is Emmons. He says that the presence of categories that are recruited for grammatical categories have to predate the emergence of Homo sapiens. In other words, the cognitive sources are already there before humans became humans. And Golston is the other person that advocates for this claim. He claims that the content of the core categories, person, number, gender, is already available in the biological systems of primates, most vertebrates, and some even in plants. So the difference between self and other, or the ability to distinguish between just one and plentifulness. The difference between are you a male or female? That is, in apes will know that. So why it's when I first read that, I'm like, no, that can't be. How could that be? But their argument I actually find quite convincing now. It's like, okay, if language emerged, and Chomsky's view is language emerged like poof, there's like all of a sudden there was one genetic mutation and there we go, there we have language. And the assumption is, according to this evolutionary view, is that so maybe suppose it's merge. Merge is the thing that makes the language faculty. Then it would be such a coincidence if at that same poof moment, we already incorporate the kinds of grammatical categories that we find in the languages of the world. So we must have taken along what we have already in the cognitive makeup before language became language. So that's the argument.
Martina?
Yes?
You have 10 minutes left.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, so suppose that's true. Now, what about knowledge? So why would knowledge, this commitment to truth, to thinking that something is true, this feeling of knowledge, why would that be the basis for the basic declarative clause? And according to some, and here I'm just take something from a blog post that you can check out here. There's an evolutionary advantage to being certain. So suppose you live in the jungle and you hear something, you're not gonna go, this could be an enemy. This could be somebody or some other animal attacking me. But maybe it's not. Maybe it's just the wind. By the time you've thought maybe it's just the wind, you're already attacked. So it's not to our advantage to be critical thinkers from this evolutionary perspective. So that's what this quote says here, roughly. Being certain has advantages. It bypasses all that, okay, it could be some other thing, okay? And that actually gets in the way of critical thinking. But so what I want to say is that there is some evolutionary basis for taking knowledge or the feeling of knowledge to be more basic. And non-human primates can attribute knowledge. Whether they can represent false belief or belief themselves remains controversial, but it doesn't seem to be controversial anymore that they can attribute belief. So from an evolutionary point of view, knowledge seems to be prior to belief. Okay, so why does this matter? Coming back to our 3 questions about knowledge, about the philosophical question, is knowledge more or less basic than belief? We had these 2 options. I think it's both, right? So once we distinguish between this subjective knowledge, this feeling of knowing that I have, what I attribute to be like the proposition is in the speaker's ground, that's subjective, whereas there's the objective knowledge, which you can express with the factive verb. And that's justified true belief. So when I say I know it's raining, then that's exactly what the people with who argue that it's justified true belief encodes. But just it's raining, that encodes this feeling of knowing. It's a grammatical construct. Is language for thought or communication? I've argued that, well, it must be for both. And if it is true that propositional structure is embedded in interactional structure, and if interactional structure is part of our language capacity, then it must be the case that language has evolved for both, for this, thought and for interaction. And then the last question that has to do with the linguistic wars. I'm going to do a little detour here and talk about how we interact with AI, and then make some conclusions about this. Okay, so how do we interact with AI? One of the things that we know is that GPT hallucinates, so it spits out information that is wrong sometimes, but the way it spits it out is in a particular way. So this is a conversation I had with ChatGPT 4. I asked, is it raining? And ChatGPT asked, it's like very carefully, to provide you with the current weather conditions, including whether it's raining, I would need to know your specific location. Could you please tell me where you are, where you are, or the location you're inquiring about? And I go, I'm in Barcelona. So then ChatGPT goes, currently Barcelona, it's raining with a temperature of 55 degrees Fahrenheit. The weather includes passing clouds alongside the rain. At the same time, though, I look out the window and I look at my app, and this is what actually was the case. It was sunny and it was 18 degrees. I don't care about how it comes up with this information. That's not the point here. The point is that then I tell it, you are wrong. And then ChatGPT goes, I apologize for any confusion or incorrect information, but it can change rapidly, blah, blah, blah. What's important is that we are always reminded at the bottom of the page where we have the conversation with GPT that ChatGPT can make mistakes. Consider checking important information. And then I ask ChatGPT, do you believe what you tell me is true? And then it goes, I don't have beliefs or consciousness, blah, 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 blah. So why, my question is, why, if we know that ChatGPT is sometimes wrong, why do we think it knows stuff? And why do we always, why is it used for medical reasons, for even in the context of war? Why do we trust it? And my answer is, it even says, I don't believe anything, I don't have beliefs. We also, arguably ChatGPT doesn't know anything because it's a large language models. But the point I want to make is that ChatGPT tells us stuff as if it knew by using simple declarative sentences. Any of these departures that we as humans have available to us to mark uncertainty, it tells us it can't use it because it doesn't have beliefs. So it is reduced to using the bare declarative clauses. But for us, bare declarative clauses mark knowledge. So as users, we cannot help but interpret this as ChatGPT knowing stuff, because that's what language, this is our unconscious knowledge of language. And if that is so, then maybe we have an argument that for the autonomy of language, of grammar, because despite what we know about large language models, we are bound to interpret the output in a particular way because grammar is set up in that way. There's no way to bypass it. So that's the little argument at the end. So now you know what I think grammar tells us about knowledge, and the little PS, what's the difference between Trump lying and ChatGPT producing what's called hallucinations? Why is that not the same. Like, why don't we just believe Trump as well, the way we believe ChatGPT? Because I think we have a social understanding of humans and their minds, but we still lack that same understanding of artificial intelligence. So maybe we shouldn't try and make artificial intelligence look even more human, because then we would be like, tempted to even more think that, or not be alerted to the fact that it's not a human. So that's where I will end.
Thank you so much, Martina. I think it's time to move to the Q&A. So please raise your hand by clicking the hand icon if you have a question for Martina, and I will assign a turn to the hands I see raised. Okay. So what I don't know, David, is if I can see the order in which the questions have been.
Yes, I think it's in the right order, so you can follow the.
So according to you, which is the first person? I think
Peter,
I can.
Julie, and then Jan, and then Kristen.
Okay. So Peter.
Hey, thanks. I loved everything about this project. I really do. I think it's great. And I have a zillion questions, so I'm just going to focus on one question. And that's the claim that there's no language where the unmarked case encodes probability. And the question is, how would it look different if the unmarked case was encoding probability? And instead of probability, let's say high probability, right? So, for example, in the past couple of weeks, I've told people that there's going to be an online conference. I've said that I'm going to be giving a presentation. I've said that John Collins is going to be there giving a presentation, etc. It seems like all of those things that I've been saying for the last few weeks are more likely highly probable than true, right? And the other thing is, well, they turned out to be true, but it doesn't seem like things that at least out of the strong sense of no, that I knew to be true. And it does seem kind of reasonable to say, well, it's like highly probable, or Lord willing, this conference is going to happen. And then the other sort of just thing on the end of that is, imagine that David or somebody had wanted to be sure I was going to be there, and then he sends me a text message. He didn't do this, but let's say he did. Are you sure you're going to be there? I mean, in that case, the sure you're going to be there doesn't sound weaker when I say, yes, I'm sure. And it actually sounds like I'm saying something stronger than when I was saying, I'm going to be there. Thanks.
Right. Good. Thanks. I'm glad you have a zillion questions. I'd like to hear them all. But this question that you have, I think that has to do with the rules for assertion more. So we have to distinguish between what grammar does, and grammar doesn't actually care about the real world. Grammar is the way it is, and it operates on truth. If it was really probability, what grammar cares about, then we would expect the system to work slightly different, that the modal systems would be different, and that you would have a model for certainty. And you wouldn't expect the systems that I have, the patterns to be like that. The example that you give, well, I think it has to do with these rules for assertion, like when can we actually say, when can we actually be absolutely certain, and that the rules for assertion, they change depending on how much is at stake. So, if I talk to my friend and I say I have the flu, then for me, it's true. I have the flu. If a doctor, diagnoses me without any, tests, and then says you have the flu, then they're liable for what they're saying. So the stakes are higher. So the higher the stakes are, the more you're like this questioning yourself will have to kick in. But grammar doesn't care about all of this. So the grammar does not care about whether it is in actuality true or not. So it's like, I don't know. It's like we in the paper with Wolfram, we make this comparison between gender. Like grammar doesn't care about whether in the real world the thing is male or female. You use feminine, and then the whole grammar, treats it as feminine, period. And that's what, like, I'm trying to say. And that it becomes very tricky to tease those things apart. But what I'm, like I said in the beginning, I love these linguistic facts when they tell us stuff. And I don't think that the languages of the world would be set up in that way. If it was probability, we would expect a different kind of model system. We would expect this to be different. We wouldn't expect that the unmarked case is the one that is the one that is used for when I have the feeling of being certain.
Thank you.
Okay, Yuri.
Thank you so much, Martina. That was super interesting. I'm worried about our non-linguistic friends. And the reason I'm worried is that, well, they can, at least highly smart animals, they can plan, they can collaborate, and presumably they do all that on some kind of epistemic attitude. And then I can do the same thing. I can plan, I can collaborate with other people without using my linguistic competence. Is that kind of attitude different from the epistemic attitude that you call knowledge then once I use linguistic material?
Right. So I think once you have language, then you can make the distinction between it's raining and I know it's raining. I think that is specifically only possible for humans. Like knowing that like saying that I know it's raining, that difference to it's raining, that is human specific. That animals can have this feeling of certainty, that is precisely like what I tried to say, that it must have been necessary for us to incorporate that into language. But what I think language then allows us to do is recursion. We can, have epistemic states about this basic epistemic state. Does that answer your question? And I don't think animals can do that.
Well, assuming that animals don't have transparency, well, which might be the case. Or maybe not. Okay, anyways, thank you.
Okay, Jan.
Oh, hi. Yeah, I was worried about, I was trying to sort out my camera, so you may have actually discussed this, about well, I wasn't sure how what you're saying related to the kind of view which George Lakoff had, and I think you mentioned it, where you have a kind of performative structure kind of built in, and then there's a worry that that kind of means that if it's true that P, then it's true that you know that P, and then therefore it's true that you know, and you get into this kind of infinite sort of regress. Whereas I took you to be wanting to kind of deny that. That's so you do have this difference.
Yes. So yeah. So the saying it's raining is the basic thing, and then you can start recursion. And precisely, if the basic was, if the basis for saying it's raining were like short for I know it's raining, then we would have the recursion problem. I don't.
Yeah. Well, then in that case, it seems to me then that at the base case, it's not so much knowing, but something like holding true or something like that.
That's why I try to distinguish between what I call subjective knowledge and objective knowledge. So when the philosophers talk about knowledge, I think they talk about two different things.
Okay, thank you. You must have said that while I was trying to fix my camera. Thank you.
Okay, I saw another hand, but Christine had a question.
I think it's me, maybe.
No, it's Christine.
Yes.
That was what I had, but I don't see it now. So perhaps we can continue with Daniel.
Hi, thanks. Like others have said, I found the talk really, really interesting, and I actually have a whole bunch of questions, but I'll ask one, and it touches on something that is, I guess, related to Peter's question, came up a little bit in your answer to Peter. But you started talking about some of these cases where it almost sounded like some of these examples where in some of the philosophical discussions about knowledge, you actually get some of these cases where some people will want to argue that knowledge will actually kind of disappear, right? So in certain cases, like if you raise the stakes enough, some people will want to argue that you no longer have knowledge, or if you're Lewis, you can say something like if you introduce like a skeptical scenario or something, then you won't have knowledge anymore. I was wondering if according to your view, you would expect then to see kind of a effects of that in discourse, where you would then, if somebody raises, some kind of, either raises the stake and one of these kind of is the bank open kind of cases, or something. Is somebody then more likely to have to use either an evidential or some kind of hedge or something like that? I was wondering if you could say something about how your interactional stance would talk.
Yes, that's exactly what I would expect. That the higher the stakes, the more I would expect the flagging off that you're not certain. Like if you can't know what the world actually looks like, and like your best guess is, I have the feeling of knowing, and so I just go and say P. But if I know that there's a lot at stake, I'm gonna hedge. But the problem, if I were to look at a corpus, I would have to be very careful to control for politeness as well, because politeness also yields hedging, and for different reasons, not because I am not certain, but because I don't want to come across as a know-it-all, right? So I if I were to do a study and you nailed it, that's exactly what I would expect, but I would have to look very carefully at what kind of corpus I would try and see what the social relations are that are involved and that kind of stuff, just to control for the politeness factor. But yeah, that's what I'd expect.
Got it, thanks.
Andres?
Yes, thank you, Martina. It was a great talk. I have maybe linguistic worry about the difference between predicates like to know versus to believe, because people has argued that to believe is weaker, presuppositionally speaking, with respect to know. Right. To know is stronger, in a sense, is marked.
Right.
So, because under the right circumstances, you can say that Sean's believes P. Right. You can get the inference that the speakers believe that not P, right? So this is because belief triggers something similar to a scalar implicature, right?
Right.
So I can imagine ways in which you can approach this in the sense of, but in a different way, because otherwise you are forced to say that, under this story about to believe and to know is marked with respect to belief, right? You are not in that.
But like I said in the end, like if we separate these two notions of knowledge. One is subjective knowledge, that's the feeling of knowing. That's the unmarked clause. The verb know expresses, I think, the factive state. That is not the same. So that's what I try to make this distinction between the feeling of knowing is encoded by a bare, bare proposition. Knowing the knowing in the sense of it must be true because everybody believes it true. It's justified true belief. That is the factive verb, and that's not the same. So language, like the words that we use are misleading in a way. They get us down a rabbit hole, and I think that rabbit hole many philosophers are in because of the language, the words. If you look at grammar is much more honest than words, I think.
So your ground phrase, I mean, your ground position in the tree cannot be modeled as a no predicate, right?
No.
It's another thing.
Yeah. No,
Okay.
it's a placeholder for my epistemic state.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Brigitte, I think now it's your turn.
Thanks. Really nice talk. Very nice way to start the conference. I just wanted to ask about the future because that's something that I think about. And I wanted to ask if you thought about how to deal with commitments,
Right.
speaker commitments about the future.
Yeah. No, I haven't thought about the future. If I just would speculate here, I would say that if you will use one type of it will do this or it's going to, depending on my feeling of certainty about what the future will bring. But again, like all this, like the stakes are much higher because obviously I know that I don't know the future, and so I don't know. It's an empirical question what would actually happen. But again, I would imagine, I would predict that there is going to be a difference in the linguistic marking depending on my certainty about the future or uncertainty about the future.
Yeah, I mean, I like that, and I just want to point out that there's like this huge wild west of future reference in different languages, and that it's going to go way beyond certainty and uncertainty, and things like aspect are going to get involved. But you're very well set up to deal with that because you have stuff in the structure, and so yeah, let's go find all these things and see how they interact. Yeah, cool.
Well, thank you.
Frederica? You can't use your microphone. Let me see. David, do you know what's happening?
No, she is co-host. So can you try to turn your microphone on, Frederica? Can you try again? I did something in the settings. Maybe it will work.
Okay, now it's working?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, good. Yeah. It's, first time I do this kind of thing. Yeah. So very stimulating talk, right? So I was just wondering whether you could formulate the generalizations without like attitudes of knowledge and belief, especially knowledge. So I mean, one could have the view that sentences have the primary purpose to describe a fact or maybe an Austinian situation. And so the lowest part could just be this primary function of a sentence to describe a fact. And then you can get the the higher levels come about if you like add attitudes, like then you have belief. And so the sense is to describe a belief. So this would go along with this recent kind of view that I and others have, according to which senses have the function of being predicate content bearers, and facts would be content bearers as well. And so you could just eliminate the issue of knowledge and yeah.
Right. Yeah. But I think it's the same kind of worry that, you know, just as the word to know is misleading in this sense, and, you know, fact, I think if I use the term fact, then again, like if I say it's raining, you know, maybe I'm hallucinating. Like I can't, you know, like the word fact is equally problematic, I think, as the word to know. But I agree with the spirit of what you're saying. But I don't think that, you know, in presenting this, it would get me out of trouble with somebody who understands fact in a particular way, that I don't want them, like there is no, I don't think there is a word, like I don't know, maybe I haven't thought about it long enough, that expresses that. Again, like I think words are very misleading because of this arbitrary relation between the meaning of a word and not of a word. And like if you look at the languages of the world, what kinds of things they use to express this, it's a mess. Like words are messy and grammar is not. And I agree with the spirit. I just wouldn't call it a fact because I don't think it will help me with explaining what I want to explain. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I mean, one would have to have a particular theory about what facts are, what beliefs are, and actually, I do have one, so that's why. I mean, I would think about whether I might be able to formulate that in certain ways without not. Yeah.
But when you have a theory, then you can define everything. I'm more worried about the layman, say, like the common sense understanding of the words, and they're like, you know, that's what I was.
Well, the function of a sentence, or whether it is meant to convey knowledge or something else, and there one can have that view on which a sentence has some primary function of characterizing a thing that is construed as a fact in a certain sense, or as a state of affairs or something, or maybe making use of a Palestinian situation. It's also very natural for thinking about the primary function of sentences, and then you can. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
I see two other hands, but I don't know if you have time, David, for two more questions.
Yeah, no problem, since the David Lindemann talk was cancelled.
Okay, so Moy?
Yeah, thank you. I have a couple of observations, linguistic, and I don't know what to do with them. So I don't know how to ask the question. But I heard Martina saying something about politeness in response to a question, I think by Daniel. And I had the same kind of worry about politeness. There could be a language, and I know one such language, where a simple declarative is not possible without a politeness marker, or well, we're not talking about questions. Questions are always cleft questions, and declaratives are not always cleft, but there is some element of politeness always marked in the sentence. Otherwise, it will be considered unsayable in the social terms. So that's one worry. The other is, I think all of you are aware of this paper, I think quite some time back, more than 50 years ago, in language. Maybe it is Hall and Thompson, but I'm not sure about epistemic states and language. And there was one observation about, particularly I remember, about weather expressions, where you can invert the sort of technically what is the embedded clause in the front. So something like it is raining, I believe, or I know, where in fact the main clause, subject and the verb are almost unspoken. So it is a kind of giving prominence to the embedded clause. And I was wondering whether languages which have a complementizer in the declarative, in a simple clause root complementizer, would that be one sort of wearing it on your sleeve way of showing what you're claiming, that declarative with "I know it is raining" is kind of by the root complementizer appearing in the simple clause, in simple declarative, one would be then in that language expressing the most strong, the subjective no in a grammatical way.
Yeah. So for the politeness thing, that I have another project on politeness, and I find it really fascinating, but it's a very tricky domain to tease apart what is grammatical knowledge and what is social norms for how to say things. That's where, and like one of the so the current linguistic analyses of politeness take it almost for granted that honorificity, for example, is about status and familiarity. When you look at politeness literature, status and familiarity are just two of the three variables that play a role in politeness, the third one being what they call the rank of imposition. So the more I impose, like if I ask you for a big favor, I will try and be more polite than if I just, if it's just a little thing. And that brings us to face saving, where like the two face saving things is, one is I want to be liked, and the other is I don't want to be imposed upon. So in a way, whenever I tell anybody anything, I'm imposing on their ground. I'm trying to change their ground. That's a form of imposition. So depending on how cultures view that, I think there might be less or more likely to grammaticalize politeness, even in basic making a statement, just to not impose, right? It's just me saying that, and you don't have to change your mind, kind of thing, right? So that about the politeness. And the other thing about the saying in subordinate clause, starting with the complementizer, there I'd have to look exactly at the fact and how what the system looks like. Like in my monograph, I analyzed insubordination as an instance of embedding something within this interactional structure. So you don't have, like in some people analyze insubordination as there's a silent I want you to, or whatever the main clause is, but I just say, well, no, it just encodes that you're dependent on the grounding structure. So, but how this interacts with the facts I've been telling here, I would have to look at the system. Like it's always the contrasts that tell you what's going on, and so I can't tell you more about that.
Okay, thanks.
Peter, did you have a question?
I just had a brief question. I took it from Frederica's question. The idea was that the issue with facts was that facts would be the unmarked case, and so you wouldn't, right?
Right. So, is there a question that goes beyond Frederica's question?
If that were the case, then what would your response be? That's so I'm reframing the question for you. Yeah.
Well, if it was the case, it's like I don't I would have to look how the facts are. I have a dog, as you can see. How that is defined. Like just my worry that I expressed with Frederica was just like from the common sense notion of the word fact. Once you define it, and you define it in the way that expresses what I want to have expressed, namely that it is like, I like this sense of that Damasio has the feeling of knowing. That's what I want to, like, the subjective sense that I know, and you recognize that and it doesn't matter what the world might in reality look like, but that's what I want to capture. Whether that you call it a fact or whether you call that feeling of knowing, I don't really. I have to think more about whether there's a difference.
Okay, so before closing, I want to inform you that unfortunately David Lindemann talk had to be cancelled, so we will resume in an hour and a half to listen to Julie's talk, and the updated version of the program is available in the link that David is posting now in the chat. So thank you again, Martina, and see you all in a while.
Okay, thank you for all your questions, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.